Greetings and welcome to our fourth and final discussion on ancient China. This particular one talks about the Tang and the Song Dynasties of China. If you are looking in your book where you can find some of this information, you'll find it in Chapter 12, Section 1. Chapter 12, Section 1. If you have any questions about this presentation or any others, please feel free to let Mr. Vincent know, and I will be more than willing to give you a hand with anything you need. And let's get started. Here we have a simple map of what would end up being the Tang Dynasty. You see some of the smaller dynasties as well, but for the purposes of our unit, we are looking specifically at the Tang Dynasty, which is made up of this area here. It kind of swerves out into the west, as you can see. But by the end of the Tang Dynasty, this would be their empire. There are the other smaller ones, obviously, but as you can see, it certainly extended it to the north and further west. So, first, setting the stage. After the Han Dynasty collapsed in 220 AD, no empire was strong enough to hold China together. There is a period of time of about 300 years where there was really no strong leader, but it wasn't until in 589 an emperor named Wendi had united the northern and southern areas of China. Under the next two dynasties of the Tang and the Song experienced the Golden Age, as it was known, making it the richest and most powerful in the world. So the Tang Dynasty expands China. It was Wendi who declared himself emperor of the Sui Dynasty. Sui Dynasty didn't last very long. It only lasted 2 emperors. But it's where we're leading into the Tang Dynasty. Between 581 and 618 AD, Wendi and his successor connected the Hanghe and the Changjiang rivers, the northern rivers and the south river. Connecting these rivers took over 5 years to dig, with more than 1,000 miles that ended up killing about half of the people that were a part of this project. 5 years, over 1,000 miles, that's pretty impressive. To give you an idea, from the city of Milwaukee to Atlanta, Georgia, is about 1,000 miles. So that kind of gives you an idea of how much work was involved in digging these trenches to create this new trade route. The purpose of this was to help, obviously, as I mentioned, to help increase trade routes between the northern and southern cities. They were able to transport, in this particular case, rice from the south to the north, as well as other products from the north to the south. A lot faster using water, obviously, than it is for by animal or carriage. So this was kind of a big project. Thousands more died in the rebuilding of the Great Wall of China. So this river project wasn't the only project that Wendi had done during his reign. The Great Wall of China had been deteriorating, and Wendi thought it prudent, as did a lot of other emperors, that it needed to be maintained. The second emperor was assassinated in 618. Really don't have a name for him, but it had gotten so bad with taxes and obviously with all these people dying, being forced labor, that they ended up killing the guy. So the Tang rulers expanded their empire. Tang Taizong was the first of the Tang Dynasty in 629 AD. Later on, Korean ruler, or Empress, Wu Zhao held the real position and eventually became emperor for herself in 690 AD. She promoted trade to foreign countries and improvements in agriculture. But in 851, the Muslims conquered central China, having to push the Chinese back, and they just couldn't hold them off. There were too many of them. And then eventually in 907, the last Tang Empire, who was actually a child, was killed by Chinese rebels. In 960, Taozu reunited China and proclaimed himself the first Song emperor. He was able to bring all of the battling smaller empires together and bring them back together. He ruled a smaller empire than others before him, but it was a powerful and very prosperous empire that he did control. Song's empire tried to buy peace with its northern enemies, but in the end it really didn't matter. In the early 1100s, the Zhou conquered northern China, again pushing them south. The era of prosperity and innovation. This is kind of the cool stuff. During the Tang and the Song dynasties, China's population nearly doubled to about 100 million people. That's pretty impressive. The invention of the movable type allowed for the printing of large words on paper, similar to what England had with the printing press. They would actually have a wooden frame that they would lay flat, and on this wooden frame they would take small letters and place them in the correct place, or letters or symbols in this case, put them in the correct order, and then use the press to stamp these letters onto paper. And when they wanted to change it, they would just move the letters out of the wood frame, put in their new letters, and then they could put something else for the next page. Certainly helped with the increase of communication. The invention of gunpowder also led the way to the creation of explosives, such as bombs, grenades, small rockets, and cannons. As you know, gunpowder is just a simple combination of certain chemicals that, when ignited, creates an explosion. So here's where we finally see the invention of gunpowder, which even today is a huge piece of a very important invention that still is with us today. Other inventions include porcelain, mechanical clock, paper money, and the magnetic compass for sailing. And even still, the magnetic compass, all these items are still used today. Porcelain is just a very fine type of material, primarily used with making dishes back then. But it's very fine, very smooth type of material. Improvements in the cultivation of rice. They were able to get a different strain of rice in the south that was able to produce 2 seasons of rice instead of just one, thereby virtually doubling the amount of rice they could produce. The more people you have, the more food you need. If you can double your production of rice, which is one of their biggest staple items, you're going to be able to help feed your people. It even got to the point where the kingdom wanted this rice so badly for its people that they freely gave this rice to the Chinese farmers in the south who were making it, to get them to use it, because it was able to be produced, or able to be used over and over and over again twice a year, which is fortunate. Trade flourished with the Great Silk Road and the advances in sailing technology. Goods that were traded to Korea, Japan, India, the Persian Gulf, and even into Africa as they began to go further and further with their boats. Now that they had the compass and a better mapping system, they could go further and map their locations, get their trade routes, and even do more trade abroad, bringing more things in from the outside world. Religion was also something that was traded back and forth with these different nations. They brought in Buddhism, Hinduism, Confucianism was actually sent out. So here we've got these different things, not just physical items of trade, but also these cultural items of trade, these traditions, these religions. And this was common throughout the time where people were trading. We'll talk more about this later on when we get into Europe with the Turks as well. Art and poetry were also very important during these dynasties. If you look through your book, there are several pieces of art, and I actually have poets that were out there that were very famous for their time period. People wanted to be well-versed, not just in agriculture and in trade, but also mentally as well. Changes in Chinese society. Chinese society became mobile because of the movement of people and the growing cities. Social classes. Just like ours today, there were three basic social classes. On the top, or the upper level, you have the upper class known as the gentry, who obtained their standings through education and civil service positions. These people were able to, for the ones that were in school, were able to pay for school and take the tests. If they were the best ones on the test, they'd get the best jobs. However, the system was sort of corrupt because those families that did have money were able to buy their kids into their positions. It even got to the point where your birthplace or your status during birth became more important than if you were born as a noble or as an emperor's child. If you were born to a high family position or high wealth position, you were almost guaranteed a high wealth job within the empire, even if you weren't a descendant of the emperor himself. Then in the middle, there was a middle class made up of merchants, shopkeepers, artisans, and other minor officials such as local governors, things like that. In the bottom of the pyramid, or the bottom of the social class system, were the laborers, soldiers, and servants. It's kind of interesting that the soldiers were put at the bottom. A lot of times soldiers in China, as well as other nations, people would be punished by being put into the military, or in order for people to survive, to get a paid meal, to continue on, help their families, they would need to take whatever job they could, which were, in a lot of cases, soldiers. It's kind of a guaranteed paycheck. Status of women. This is one of the interesting things during these particular dynasties. The status of women declined even further than what it had been in previous dynasties. Women were considered less important to families' prosperity. Women were almost considered an inconvenience in some places. The fact that they did some work around the house did not determine how prosperous the family was. It was the male's position in the family that determined that. The woman's job was just to help out around the house and basically do whatever the husband wanted and look pretty doing it. The fact that she was there meant nothing to the prosperity and the wealth of the family, unfortunately. One type of practice that was brought up during these dynasties was something known as foot binding. The foot binding of women's feet used to get girls married off to wealthy men, despite the fact that it crippled them for life. As you can see on the image below, this is kind of the ultimate result of the long-term effects of foot binding. Tomorrow you'll have the opportunity to watch a video relating to foot binding, but basically how it works is that about the age of 5 or 6, a girl would have her foot wrapped in a bandage, and eventually be wrapped every day, tighter and tighter, to the point where her toes, except for her big toe, would break and roll on top of the rest of her foot, as you can see in the picture here. Happened over and over and over again. And because at the age of 5 and 6, the bones are still malleable, where they can still bend and twist, this would permanently disable the young girl for the rest of her life, making it very painful to walk, very painful to have to put shoes on, things along that nature. There's a belief that there was an emperor whose daughter had a clubbed foot, and in order to make his daughter not so self-aware and feel bad about it, he ordered that this happen to all the women in order to make the women look nicer for their rich male husbands. It was believed that a woman with the smallest foot would be able to get the most wealthy husband, because it was the small feet that determined the attractiveness and the beauty of a female back then. But as you can see, it's very painful. If you go to China today, there are some older people that still are alive that have practiced the act of foot binding. but it was outlawed about 70 years ago. Actually, it was more like 90 years ago, roughly, because of its barbaric implications. But it still has some remnants today, unfortunately. Looking forward, the social, economic, and technological transformations of the Tang and the Song periods permanently shaped Chinese civilization. They endured even as China fell to the group of nomadic outsiders, the Mongols, which we'll learn about later on. So a lot of these things that were invented, created, even cultured during these two dynasties still exist today. And there you have it. If you have any questions concerning this lecture, again, please call Mr. Vincent, and he will be happy to assist you in any way. As a reminder, Mr. Vincent is available on Tuesdays after school at Viking Academy, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.